Get you ready? This meeting to order. Stand for the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call for the record. Mayor Lindsay is not present. Mayor Pro Tem Crane,
Here.
Councilor Howe,
Here.
Councilor Weeks,
Here.
and Councilor Crane.
Here.
We have Councilor Curry. I missed one of them.
Sorry.
It was Councilor Curry.
Here.
All right. We have a quorum. You may proceed.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve today's agenda?
I make a motion to approve today's agenda.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Floor is yours for more comp plan.
Yeah, thank you, Pro Tem, members of council, Village Clerk. So, the last time we met, we just did 3 chapters on economic development, tourism, and basically aviation. Bringing forward to you 3 additional chapters, all related to infrastructure for the most part. In fact, there was a meeting last week with the infrastructure committee. I think they're going to meet on Monday to discuss who's going to be the chair, vice chair, secretary, that kind of thing. But the idea is to incorporate some of these ideas from the comp plan, ideally into code amendments. And this, I think, is what you're going to see coming pretty quickly, I believe, with Title VII on things to do with stormwater and just better. There's a lot of assumptions people have about the code that weren't in the code that we should put in the code. So all this is going to blend and feed together. So the chapters we're going to talk about today are public utilities, transportation, and roads. And with respect to public utilities and roads, this is from conversations with Kurt on what the departments have been doing over the last year and a half. The Comprehensive Plan Committee has looked at the draft to give some feedback as well. Transportation was really coming out of a couple of different things. You had aviation, you've got parks and trails, and then you got transportation. I say parks and trails because in parks and trails, there's a conversation of pedestrian connectivity with Frank Young Trail, the green belts. But how do we get people from the RV park to the Great Lawn? You've got sidewalks and crosswalks. And how do we also be mindful of making sure snow's cleared in the winter for people to use the sidewalks? Crosswalks are delineated. There's some conversations that's happened in the last year about as you start up North Angel Fire Road, right now it's 2 lanes, but that if we had parallel parking, not only could we pick up for events, but it would slow traffic down, up and down North Angel Fire Road, up to basically where Pizza Stop is, right? And so all these are conversations that have been put to paper on these 3 chapters that are here for your consideration. And before we begin, I know we had some pretty heavy lifting, in my opinion, on the 3 chapters that we discussed last time. If there are any suggestions or edits or revisions you'd like to see in that, just email those to me, because we have a working draft for each chapter where people have given edits that at the end of it all, we agree on these edits and we could put that all together. So the last time we were here, there were a number of tables and charts from the Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the state of New Mexico. You're not going to see a whole lot of that today because the tables and charts related to these chapters are pretty nominal. So, but did you guys have any questions or comments from the last conversation that you want to? Oh yeah, what about? We can start with that and then we'll just jump into these 3.
One thing I was thinking on air travel was to be able to maybe have, when the fire department or anybody has any type of continuing education or anything down in Albuquerque, to try to incorporate the advanced air system with their classes and so forth, and, just to help try to get those during maybe slower times to just help support that.
That makes sense.
There.
There's firm I'm doing some work with in Albuquerque, they're doing a work in Carlsbad. I'm like, man, it just, when are we leaving for this drive from Albuquerque? And it's like, you can fly to Carlsbad, right? Wait, what? You can fly to Carlsbad now. I mean, I know that camaraderie and fellowship in the car for 5 hours, but you can get there faster, get a car. So that makes a lot of sense to try to incorporate that into some of the other activities the village needs anyway. And maybe that frees up resources because now we don't have as many cars shuttling down. We got people there. So I'll put that down.
Yeah, it's been surprising. We had J1s this year and it's actually cheaper for us to fly them on Advanced Air and put them up in a hotel room than to have somebody drive them there.
Wow.
Because that's a person's time and then also the mileage on the vehicle.
Makes sense.
And of course, that assumes you don't go to leave and find a semi truck dumped over.
Right.
To leave the valley, you have to take a pass somewhere somehow. So the air travel makes a lot of sense.
Chuck, you were gonna add something?
I have a few things from last week, but a lot of them are just things I want to discuss with you. So
Okay,
once this is over, I'd like to just sit down and kind of run through.
I'll be here.
Great.
Cool. Well, those are great ideas. We can try to incorporate that into some of the strategies on the air travel. Speaking of, Greg's gonna provide some updates to me about how many shuttle service we had for air travel, how many people, what was the occupancy rate or vacancy rate or usable rate of people flying in. Because I think that's important to show just at least a timestamp of, are we being successful or not? Did it grow from the year before? If we've got that data, we should put that in, so.
Yeah, I think we're at 40%, which is expected.
I thought I heard 49. Oh, we were 49.
Whatever it was about what was.
So it's that kind of information I think should be incorporated. And so I'm going to coordinate with Greg because I think he's also got updates on short-term rentals too. So to show that success over time as well, I think is important. So. All right, well, I'm going to jump in on public works, public utilities, wastewater, sanitary, septics, and water. That's just because it's the biggest of the three. So this came out, I think, in the infrastructure committee last week. Chuck, you were at that. Most of the infrastructure that we have in the village, the village did not install it. It was accepted through annexation. It was probably installed in the 60s or the 70s when standards were just different standards. And so over time, the village has accepted more property through annexation, but the roads were as they were, right? Some of the county roads back here off Halo Pines, up towards the blinking light. It's the same with the water and wastewater. So when the village took over the infrastructure, I want to say it was the 1998 annexation that really turned.
1988.
So there's a couple. So 1988 was the first, 1986 is when the village was first
Right.
developed, and that was 1988 annexation, but it was still relatively small here in the core. 1998 is when you saw most of the resort subdivisions come under the umbrella of the village. So we took over, going up towards Yaspens and back around the mountain. But yeah, there were some previous annexations, but they were relatively small compared to 1998,
Yeah.
where we also took over the sewer lagoons that used to be over here at the corner. And then the village was able to get funding to move them down to the lagoons down to the end of Darrell Benjamin. There was a lot of infrastructure that, minus that we just accepted. And as just part of the annexation. And so it's with that, there was also some water rights that came in that annexation agreement with the resort. Because even though Angel Fire is a pretty young municipality in the Moreno Valley, it has the oldest water rights in the Moreno Valley, coming off the Cieneguilla Creek, which was all part of the Maxwell Land Grant. So But that's really limited as far as our senior shares go. Everything else is pretty junior when it comes to the development of everybody else in the valley. And so it's really hard for the village to acquire additional senior rights just because we just got here compared to some of the ranches and the other municipalities in our watershed that have been able to get water rights long before us. And so with this, I started out with the development of sanitary sewer as it developed through the city to get to the lagoons. The village accepted what was available in 1988, 1998. But then as the Grand Hotel was being built, they extended water and sewer up. It's not on Sage, it's the next row up. So there's water and sewer that's available there. And then in 2008, there was the PID, development of the PID. So you saw another extension of water and sewer from like St. Andrews to Colonial. And that's really been it with respect to sewer mains, minus the extension that went up 434 down Freya to connect to the RV park. Those are the three main milestones in sewer expansion of our network. But in a relative term, you've got about 120 miles of water mains. Yeah, we have about 7 miles of sewer mains. There's a lot of people still on septic, particularly around Monteverde Lake. We actually have Valley of the Utes has a sewer system in it, but it stops at 434. And so to connect to that subdivision and all the properties around it, I mean, right now the village is talking about, looking at the water upgrades around Monteverde 1 and 2, I believe. If you could extend that sewer, it would have to come under 434 and then north to Olympic Park. That's the closest connection that we have. That we could also bring more subdivisions online and providing that service. And it would have to be, engineered and then constructed. There are properties, I don't know why this happened, why it didn't happen, but when you subdivide, you're responsible for all your infrastructure connections. So they subdivided Valley of the Utes and they put the infrastructure in, then it just stopped. And it's, by code, it was supposed to keep going. So it actually connected. So there have been conversations with the property on the top of the hill behind the stables. It's all been rezoned O2. There's a fire hydrant, I think, at the end of the bridge that you cross. With the cul-de-sac. So there's been discussion about folks, well, what infrastructure is out there? Well, you got water. Oh, cool. We want to subdivide it. Well, now you owe a sewer. It runs here, but you're going to have to do the mile connection to get it to Olympic Park. And the village did that extension at Olympic Park when they redid San Mateo, going up Country Club. There was an opportunity where the road was open. Hey, should we run a manhole across the street? Yeah, do it. While we're here, at least we've already cut the street. Let's go. So the first part of this chapter talks about those phases in sewer mains and how much we have to discharge, a little over 1,100 acre feet of discharge with our sewer lagoons. There has been conversations in previous GO bond discussions. Where can we put another sewer main that'll generate more tap service? And that was Agua Road, Elliott Barker, and West Shore, maybe. There were 3 roads on the west side of 434 where we could pick up properties. Westridge, yeah. There's commercial and residential taps that we could get. I know I was Northern Propane before Suburban. So I talked to the manager of Northern and said, if the village put a sewer main, we'd love to, we'd tap into it as we get rid of our leach field. We could do something with that portion of our property. So there have been some conversations about extending main services, but I think with the infrastructure committee, we can try to finalize and formalize some of these strategies that are listed. But primarily, if our lagoon system is at 20 to 25% capacity, and we actually have people paying into the system, we should look at ways to extend that network. The sewer lagoons that we have required, I think, a $10 million upgrade 3 years ago. And that's all financed through tap fees. I mean, so there's nothing outrageous. It's just financed over long term over our tap fees. But if we had more tap fees going into the system, we could finance that and maybe accelerate some payments on it. So there's always been a push to try to get more people onto sewers. And you'll notice from 2006 to 2025, there is a jump in dwelling units, but there's also a percentage jump of people tapping into sewer service. Our wastewater accounts are broken out into business, commercial, mobile estates, residential, how many are active and how many are inactive, which seems pretty stable per category. But those are the real highlights of our wastewater accounts, and the ideas that we have that's been mentioned on, we should probably extend our sewer network. How we do it, which direction, we need to formalize that. Getting into water, it comes into the same scenario. All this infrastructure, most of the infrastructure was done at annexation. We accepted it. And with the exception of 4 tanks, most of the infrastructure, the water tanks and the booster stations were done between 1980 and 1983. And so talking to Kurt, there's a move to try to standardize improvements. So for example, tank 7 up on Cheerful Way was 100,000 gallons. It's been replaced with 300,000 gallon tank. So the idea is as tanks start to age and come up for new construction, we triple the size of our storage capacity with these tanks moving into the future. Kurt has shared some ideas that they've incorporated into the booster stations where they were designed for 2, but they only had 1. So now we've actually got 2. And that helps with servicing the pumps and the boosters because you can run 1 and alternate timing on them. There have been some upgrades on standard fitting where there used to be 7 different types of standards. Now he's consolidated down to 3. So the amount of equipment and training we need to do to replace out parts or install new parts instead of dealing with 7 different types of fittings, we now have 3. The water section, for the most part, does, I think, a lot of celebrating on what the village has done just over the last year and a half with your water meters, upgrades and installs. There's a new inventory of all your fire hydrants that we now have on a GPS system that's incorporated into a GIS with the village. And I believe the GPS also generates a street address for the fire department that it's roughly in the 400 block of Camino Real or what have you. So they get an idea of, well, what other hydrants are in that area to provide service. We identified the work you have up on the wall in updating upgrading the 2-inch mains going to 6-inch mains. Our water supply, this really comes straight from the state engineer's office and working to Kurt. How many water shares we have that are senior, how many storage acre feet we have at Eagle Nest Lake. And that is an ongoing conversation that the village has been trying to do, is still get ahead on water availability to service all the visitors plus full-time residents that we have. So then we just started getting into the strategies and this part of the infrastructure. Goal number 1 is sufficient water supply for the village and projected growth. So some of the objectives are, let's pick a number to increase our water rights by purchase or lease by a percentage by 2030. I know this has come up with water options for snowmaking credits, development of conservation plan, water conservation plan. And this last objective is always ongoing on decreasing the water loss from the age of our infrastructure, whether it's meters, service lines, boosters, tanks, by a percentage by 2030. The strategies that flow from that, the village has the capacity to ask for funding through ICIP for water rights. Most municipalities that are looking for water rights put it on the list to ask Santa Fe, can you help us finance this so we can get some more water rights? I know, I don't know if it was this council or the previous council, that may have been on one of their asks prior. So I've seen it listed before. I just think it should be an ongoing strategy to see how we can capture more shares, whether they're junior or senior. There's been some conversation about the rates that we have. Right now, it's just one singular rate, it's residential or commercial. And if there's a difference between a commercial rate and a residential rate, what would that look like? And how does that offset some of the costs that we're trying to upgrade our infrastructure? What can we do on billable rates that we have? There's actually a section in chapter 7 that talks about water conservation. And there are some proposed upgrades to that where there's supposed to be a flag at the fire station to delineate where conservation stage 1 or stage 2, and you're supposed to put out a mailing and you're supposed to post it in a newspaper. Well, we want to take advantage of the new fancy sign that we got and the email notifications that we have now with billing and all the events that the Visit Angel Fires have been able to propose. So rather than putting it out in the newspaper within 48 hours, we can send out an email blast or post it up here so folks know. And I can't remember the last time we were in a conservation stage 1 or stage 2, but it's still in our ordinance to acknowledge. And so that's why this is here. Strategy 1.7 for water, you kind of have that on the board of where should infrastructure upgrades start? How do we come up with a plan of where do we want to take aging infrastructure and start to upgrade it? Another thought besides around the lake is what else needs to happen in the core? I know there was a lot of improvements like 4 years ago. Vale was ripped out. There were new manholes being installed. What else needs to feed off of that work if it needs to? So that's just an ongoing strategy. In addition to strategy 1.8, there's a lot of, and this came up in the infrastructure committee because a lot of the water mains that we accepted through annexation, there's ways to detect it now where there's a metal stripe or something where you can sense where the water is. But a lot of these lines that were done in the 60s, that wasn't required. And so it's not uncommon. Like when we did Country Club road improvements right in front of the Country Club 4 years ago, the map said that the water lines were on the south side, and it turned out they weren't. Because the maps, nobody had an actual as-built. And so trying to make sure that we have a really good idea where the infrastructure is located, I think is just going to be an ongoing strategy moving forward. Goal number 2 was water distribution efficiency. We talked a little bit about this, the 2 and 4 inch mains that need to be upgraded. Is there a percentage over time that we want to strive for to complete? Number of fire hydrants. Ideally are supposed to be spaced every 500 feet. 400. Okay, well now it's changed. So
Yeah, the last, excuse me, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. With the last fire code update, it got moved to 400 feet.
So as we have an updated inventory of our hydrants and we start looking at fire coverage and where we have them, as we do these upgrades from a 2 to a 6 inch main that can actually satisfy the required pressure for a hydrant to be serviced, how do we map this out? What part of the village should take priority and what's a 2nd tier subdivision, 3rd tier subdivision? How do we formulate that plan? Yeah.
Go ahead. I was just gonna ask, you have the nice objectives for the water and the solid waste, but there aren't any for sewer.
Goal number 3. It's listed under water strategy.
Oh, it's on the water strategy.
Yeah, I can actually change that to wastewater goal.
mean, I just didn't know whether, it seemed like there should be some goals related to extending the wastewater lines.
I agree. I just had it listed as water. So,
That's a great point, though, that, you know, like where the condos are, those subdivisions of Danger Fire Village North, Danger Fire Village 1 and 2, those could probably be easily, upgraded to sewer a lot easier than Monteverdi Lake.
they could, and I think that's why we should look at the maps and come up similar to the strategy you have for Monteverdi Lake, right?
Right.
There's so many lots with substandard lines. Well, how do we, and then after you've upgraded those lines that can now be serviced by hydrants, it's the same type of analysis on sewer mains too. How do we get to something that has an immediate impact that starts generating more tap fees? So I think Chuck had something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Several years ago, we had a company come in and do an assessment on where our most dangerous wildfire possibilities were. Maybe particularly for upgrading fire hydrants, we could look at that study.
We can.
Mayor Pro Tem Councilman Howe, that study is what we utilize to pick the subdivision we're doing, because fires tend to come out of the southwest. And so the most likely area for a fire to come is gonna be from the national forest. And that's why we picked that coupled with the fact that they're almost all 2-inch lines. The fire hydrants are 1,000 feet apart for the most part. Those are all factors that we considered in choosing Monteverdi Lake water upgrade as a primary. I do want to make sure there's one thing, there's several Monteverdi Lake subdivisions. So the sewer one isn't the same one for the water. We're not gonna put sewer in where the water is going over around the lake on that southwest corner of the village. There's another work that we have all the engineering work done, which is also Monteverdi Lake 1 and 2. They're the subdivisions immediately behind the clubhouse. And we have sewer to that. As a matter of fact, in that last revision, they took sewer up that hill behind the clubhouse. So those are the first for sewer would be those two subdivisions, because the sewer heads out right there. And it would be an easy connection, and gravity would allow us to utilize the sewer, the sewer to get back into the system.
I think that goes to your thing. You know, we had these high density condos, but around the country club, you got all these smaller lots,
Yeah.
right? Cause they were like in the 60s. So you kind of have that same density that
And a
you,
lot of houses built up.
yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
a lot of.
So that all makes sense in the strategies that are being proposed. It's a matter of, I am envisioning that you get some lead from the infrastructure committee to help prioritize and flesh this out. So that you get a resolution to council to say, let's go here and there, and then let's, year 2 and 3 is here kind of thing.
So I have a question. I understand your Monteverdi Lake. The project on the wall where we're specifically targeting the 2-inch sewer lines. I know there's no practical way right now to hook sewer up that far south. But are we not planning on putting in deadheaded sewer lines so that someday we're gonna tear the road up twice?
It's just too expensive, too cost prohibitive.
Okay. And then Jeff, you were mentioning there are some condos in the core that are not on sewer?
No, I was saying that the condos are on sewer in the core, which is Club, Danger Fire Village North and 1 and 2 are right there too, so it'd be easy to tap into those
Right there.
as a face as well.
Got it.
Cause there's still some streets back here, like Valley has water and sewer. I think Alta's got water.
Alta has water, but no
Yeah.
sewer.
Right.
You know, but you've got services around that it's not like we're having to come up from across 434.
But Valley has it because of the community.
Yes, yeah. And so,
But if you could, I live on Alta, so to pick on it, right? If you did that 1.25 miles or whatever of Alta, you'd pick up 15, 18 homes, something like that. But your tap fees versus the cost of putting that in,
I still think it's part of this overall conversation,
Yeah.
right? That where could we strategize some streets that are in the gaps, right? Good valleys here, You got some of these other streets that have it. What do we do with the gaps? You know, looking at Alta. I mean,
Alta, Mammoth, Jackson Hole.
Yeah, that whole area.
yeah, I don't think it would
Jackson
be,
Hole, no sewer.
I don't think it'd be just one street,
Well,
but
not all the way down.
To the bottom, at the bottom,
But it doesn't go to Pine Tree Commons, does it?
Pine Tree, all the condos around.
So Pine Tree Commons is on the sewer?
Yeah, they're all covered, but Jackson Hole where it follows.
There's manholes down there.
I just know one of our owners that's on Jackson Hole bought a lot behind him so he could run a sewer and tap into the sewer line that was going up to Pine Tree.
Through it.
I think that this is an ongoing conversation that needs to start moving overall. This part of the infrastructure where we know if we extend it, we can start generating tap fees because we're under capacity in our lagoons, right? And so how do we get this better into balance? And if you do it to Alta, but that also gets you higher up to another part of the subdivision, I think that's part of the conversation. It's not just, it's 15 homes. But here's the other thing. It's also sewer availability on a vacant lot. That's also another fee that the village requires too. So you get service on the houses that are there.
Yeah,
You get service on the lots that are there. But again, what's the gain of this street by itself as opposed to we can coordinate this part of the village as well? Maybe you get better pressure flows coming down, gravity fit, I don't know. But ultimately, that's a conversation I think really needs to start happening. Because to be honest, in my opinion, you've been really focused on water improvements because you really didn't have a choice. With the leakages that you've had and the upgrades that you've been having to do, that kind of takes precedent, and that's kind of evident in the successes that you've had for the last 18 months, 23 months. That same type of conversation on a sewer extension of that network, I think needs to come around sooner rather than later. And it's not just the houses that are there, it's that service availability too, to help finance all that work. So,
Well, since we get credit back on the return wastewater,
yes,
maybe to help with the water part too.
absolutely.
there's probably a conversation to have that you're obviously gonna increase in property values when you have sewer availability there, but pick on Alta again as a good example. Most of the uphill lots have homes on them. The empty lots are the downhill lots, which are in general a little less desirable, I think would be a fair way to say it, so.
Oh, man, you're closer to the Great Lawn if you're down at the bottom. Just walk over.
It's a walking trail. now.
That's.
Yeah. But I just mean from a bang for buck, because you're talking about how do we spend $5 million on paper for sewer lines that's gonna maximize tap fee returns and all of that.
And I think that's,
Monty Birdie 1 and 2 is ideal.
Yeah,
and I think that's where the Go Bump conversation was 4 years ago. Agua Road, you know, you got commercial and residential owners with no service. Elliot Barker, you know, you kind of have it at 434, but doesn't go all the way down. You know, so I think that's part of that strategy session of which streets do we pick? What subdivisions do we prioritize? But I just point out, you kind of started that. I mean, you didn't just pick this from random. There was a thoughtful conversation of how do we get this subdivision moving on the books? We just need to find time to do the same thing on sanitary wastewater. That's all we're saying. And I will note that water goal number 3 should be wastewater goal number 1. So
Yeah, I just thought it would be having time.
I think just to finish goal number 2, to enhance monitoring of village well, booster stations, pump houses and meters. The village is moving, I think, in the right direction and may have completed this objective by the end of the year. But the strategies really go into what we've been talking about. We've been blending water strategies and sewer strategies together, but it all comes down to infrastructure priorities and how do we extend networks? How do we update and upgrade? The capacity from a 2-inch line to a 6-inch line, that's a lot of storage capacity that we're capturing with the pressure system for the hydrants and for service in the homes. There's a lot of benefits that are gained just by doing that, 4-inch upgrade. So what we have here in these strategies really all fall along into those lines. The only other thing, so strategy 3.2, identify, design, and install new wastewater mains and subdivisions created prior to annexation, maybe looking at ICIP funding. So if we have an older subdivision that we really feel should be prioritized for a sewer extension, how do we do that? And that's one funding option that I think from an infrastructure standpoint, the village is used for infrastructure. But I think we should formulate a plan to make that more successful. Any other comments or thoughts on water sewer?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Council, I don't know, I'm sorry I was late. I was on the phone with the mayor and we were trying to get some things resolved since I hadn't spoken to him in a week. But, I don't know if it's already stated, but, Councilor Howell is heading up the new infrastructure committee. And a lot of this is gonna end up going before them and they're gonna be they have a lot of work to do, this committee, but a lot of these will be answered and recommendations will come from that committee to the council.
And I think they're looking forward to it. I think for the first time, you now actually have, well, depending on the night, you actually have 5 city members, right?
Yes.
Where it's been 2 or 3, and I think it's just been a challenge in finding a good number of people to work on this topic. And so, meeting Friday, it was a lot of updates of where we are, just the conversation we've been having about water and sewer, kind of go on roads. But I think the idea is members of that committee are actually going to do some field work and do some assessments to help evaluate some of the infrastructure that's out there, starting with roads, so that we can again come up with plans and priorities throughout the village.
Well, the new committee, as opposed to the old committee, the new committee actually, each member brings professional specialties to the committee versus sometimes having citizens who are very helpful and hopeful as much as they can be, but they're waiting to be fed by somebody else.
Well, the last section of this chapter is dealing with solid waste. It's a really short chapter, but the village at one time had a solid waste program that also included recycling. But the recycling component has been reduced, and I left it blank because I just couldn't remember the year where the village stopped accepting aluminum and glass and plastic.
We still do aluminum. We still do the aluminum cans and the tin cans. The only things, cardboard, aluminum, tin, the only things we currently recycle.
We used to do more, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Correct.
We used to do glass, we used to do plastic, but then I want to say the center that we took our material to stopped accepting some materials as well. So it was kind of difficult to accept it when there was no place to take it, but I didn't know when that.
I think it was 2019 when that center in Albuquerque shut down and we had to start taking material to Denver.
Yeah, and Taos quit taking it to Denver a couple of years after that. They got out of glass and plastic as well. Does it just, by the time you pay a diesel truck to go from here to Denver?
Couldn't even break even.
Yeah.
So you think it was 2019?
I think so. We can ask Rick to FOIA.
I know that's been a conversation, folks coming up, we should recycle more, we need to recycle more. We said, yeah, well, we did, but then there's some things in the market that we just can't control. And if no one's accepting it, then it's hard for us to collect it because there's nowhere to take it. So, and we don't have a landfill. Everything is shipped out. I want to say it's still the wagon mound where we go. So, we have to offset that cost with our fees, to make sure it balances. But, yeah, I'll ask Rick what year that changed, and then I'll update tin, aluminum and cardboard is really it, so.
Next, the aluminum and tin, you have to go to
You gotta go to the transfer station for it.
can't go to the recycle center.
But I think the cardboard is the only thing we take. I'll have to ask and make sure, but at one point we were taking our tin and aluminum to Taos because they would aggregate it. We weren't getting anything from it. We were just saving the money of having to drive it to Albuquerque.
When we used to take the aluminum over at the recycle center, but we kept getting trash put in the aluminum cans and now the whole process breaks.
So what was happening was we were taking our aluminum to Taos and it would sit there and the EPA won't let you store it more than 2 years. So if they didn't save up enough, they just pushed it all into their landfill.
All right.
And you can only store it for 2 years.
For the 10,000-year recycle plan.
Right. Well, going into solid waste, this is pretty short. There's been some conversations and I think some of this has been working out, but it still should be listed as a strategy. The overall objective is just to have a good, solid program for waste and try to reduce waste where we can. The strategy one was trying to integrate short-term rental, operations and management to let people know exactly where they're supposed to take what materials where. You always see in Facebook, people bringing their hot ash and dumping it. And how did that start a fire? I put it in a bag. Yeah, so how do we, I just think this is gonna be an ongoing conversation is why it's listed as a strategy. And what methods work, and what can be improved. I still think we do have a lot of visitors to the village. That just need to be educated, what resources are where, and how we disseminate that information.
Is it even possible to put a solid waste sign at the intersection
What's
Solid waste.
from Halo Ponds?
A waste
Right
sign.
in front of it.
Oh, is there? I never saw it. I never seen
Yeah,
it.
there's one
Okay.
in that empty lot, the first part of that.
You asking?
If there's this way to put solid waste this way.
Oh, a sign.
Yeah, sign.
Oh,
Yeah,
I guess there is, I'll have to look.
there is.
Okay.
but I think you want to talk to Dollar General because folks think, because the arrow's near them, they think it's there.
No, we moved it. So it used to be right in front of the entrance to Dollar General and people would pull into their parking lot and dump their trash. And we moved it down, probably 100 yards closer to the intersection. So now Dollar General's been fine.
Everybody is supposed to be posting all short term.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be doing that right now.
One of the conversations that came up with recycling is when we start having these big events on the Great Lawn, and I know there's more projected. We've got recyclable, collect some type of container for that, different from trash. That was special events and big events, since we're already having collections for garbage. We strategy number 3, you have this once a year of the annual cleanup. But, if there's other times of the year for off seasons before the season starts, then do 2. Develop funding sources to expand, upgrade solid waste facility for service use and collection on waste and recycled materials. Evaluate plans to accept recycling options for aluminum and glass when market rates make them feasible. Well, we're already doing it. So it'd just be glass, maybe plastic.
Okay, on that, option, that says 1.4, solid waste 1.4. I mean, one of the goals that I would like to see accomplished, and I get pushback every time I bring it up, but I'm not gonna quit. I would like to have a more centralized solid waste drop off to make it easier on people. And I know that people don't want that solid waste drop off close to them because, smells or whatever. But I think the answer to that would be an enclosed facility. And if we had an enclosed facility where people could come drop their trash off on the inside. Because I will tell you, if you're looking at trash being dispersed in the village, the biggest problem we have are the cans at condos. And because people dump trash on the outside, they'll fill them up and the lid will get up, the crows will get in. They leave the lid up, the crows get in. And as soon as the crows get in there, the trash is all over the place. And, I mean, to be frank, the only solution I can come up with for that, unless you had, automated cans where the lid, you push a button and it goes up and then it automatically comes down, which there aren't really those out there that are practical. I think we need to, if we had a facility close to the core that was enclosed, I think we could get rid of all but the commercial cans inside the village and just have people go to that central location and drop off. And there are other municipalities that do that. And it would be a building, it'd be a building, it'd be like a 2-story building, and, we could try and make it look nice. But it would have automatic doors on it that came up and down and people could come in and drop off. We would use compactors. It would be we would probably be able to save our payroll costs by about 30% with these compactors that people put it in there and it compacts them into the container, and all you're doing is pulling the container out and taking it to Wagon Mound, putting it back in when you get it back. So
And you'd still have the transfer station.
still have a transfer station.
Could it go where fire station 1 is now? Or is that gonna be a fight?
Well, it could be, except we're gonna lose that property because it says on the deed that that has to be used for fire station or it goes back to the.
It's not a municipal building, it has to be a fire station.
It says fire station. But in one of those, I was thinking one of those lots that's like over by the bank in that commercial area, if we could acquire something over there. And you would need a building about the same size as our drop-off facility, but it'd be designed so people could come in, drop off stuff, pull out. And the trucks would be able to be pulled in and out on either side, and I think it would go a long way in solving whatever trash issues we do have. And if it's in the core, it's gonna be more convenient. It's gonna be easier to see and we could make it look nice. And since it'd be interior, I don't think you're gonna worry about the smells and other things like we have out here, or we used to have over here next door back when it was.
Well, and I assume we would designate that as household trash only. We would send all the commercial trash customers out to the transfer station.
But it also sounds like you would have a staff person there, right? Could load it into the compactor or make sure the compactor is being used so you can actually catch it, as opposed to now where you see a lot of construction material debris getting in because there's no one really catching anybody, so.
So the plan would be to have staff during business hours and use the compactor. And then have cans inside the building during non-business hours. So they couldn't use a compactor, because a compactor can be dangerous, a kid crawls in it or something like that. So the idea would be to use the compactors during business hours and then have some cans there that people could just pull through and dump them in the cans. And then those cans could be emptied into the compactors during the day when the crew's there. And, that's kind of the 30,000 foot vision of what we'd want. We just got to get over the stigma of people having a trash collection point. Everybody says, just put it over there. We could do that. It's just that it's not that convenient,
Well, and we have those, I had this conversation with some of the condo people that you have the people that are gonna leave early on their departure day. And they're in the core area and they're headed to Lubbock, and so they're gonna South Angel Fire Road, Mora, gone. They're not going that way. They're only going that way. So I think that was the thought behind keeping it somewhere in the core, so as the bulk of people are leaving, it's right there.
I mean, we could have it in a year, we have the money, but that's something the council's gonna have to get the public comfortable with, and you're gonna have to be comfortable with it. I haven't even, this is the first time I've really spoken about it much outside of me and the mayor.
And no one cut you off. Just for the record. I think that goes into strategy 1.4, which I really think now we should flesh this out even more. If it's a conversation about location, it's a location about size, and it's a conversation about mobility in and out and circulation. This makes a lot of sense why it's on the list. But now it's got some meat to this conversation too. Makes a lot of sense to have. So I think this is again, why it's a working draft, right? Why these conversations need to percolate, and we need to talk about it a little more.
It's all about who gets their $8 million building next, right?
So the last thing, it's, cause you kind of mentioned this just briefly, is the construction debris that shows up here at the transfer, at this point, instead of going to the transfer station. You know, I think because there is a conversation going on in Title VII about, construction sites and your encroachment permits and how that impacts the roads, different language about construction debris, materials and litter. Maybe that's not a Title VII, but a Title IX amendment to look at. You know, it's not uncommon to see a lot of stuff just blowing off construction sites. Cause there's nobody's collecting it. You've got debris in the road. Sometimes it's nails, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's part of this overall conversation on solid waste, and how do we find a plan for folks to use the services that we have? But also, if we need to look at some of the code provisions, we should have that on the table to do as well. This is great conversation. I know there's gonna be more. Just send me an email. So with roads, again, this is from, conversation with Kurt, looking over from the comprehensive plan committee on just any edits. Goal number one, a management plan for road safety improvements throughout the village. How do we create a process and methodology for road upgrades within the village? How to establish maintenance standards for roadside ditches on village streets? And how do we manage storm drain effects on the roads? This is part of that starting point that we had Friday with the infrastructure committee, how we come up with an assessment to evaluate our roads. So it's not just on Kurt and his crew, but we have more people who can cover more ground. Maybe we need to look at, and this is part of strategy one, look at different benchmarks for material selection, roadway sections, frequency for reporting road surface conditions and maintenance. All of that comes into play when discussing which roads are we going to prioritize for maintenance. Is this a heavy used road or not? I know you had mentioned that there's going to be a traffic study on some intersections in the
It's
village.
just on 434.
434. What points? Just
The blinking light to the end of the village. Actually, the Forest Road 76.
okay, so the whole length. That's great. I think this is something that's gonna get fleshed out with the infrastructure committee, strategy number one. Strategy number two is, I think, a starting conversation we've been having in Title VII. It used to be, you got an encroachment permit when you were putting in a culvert, and if you weren't putting in a culvert, we didn't want you didn't need to pull an encroachment permit. And I think what we've learned is that, an encroachment permit for a culvert by the time you start construction is one thing. But when you have your trucks coming in to clear the lot to get it ready for construction, and you don't have an encroachment permit, that's just as, or even more damage to being done to our roads than there were through the construction crews coming in. And so we're trying to handle this part in Title VII, but I think that's for the overall goal of roadway strategies. How do we just make sure our roads have a longevity standard in them by improving the storm drain?
Hey, on those two, who's doing the inspections for those encroachment permits?
Public Works.
Kurt,
Yeah. So Kurt will do a
You think,
site visit.
that guy's like, we need 5 of him, right?
Yeah.
So, what about having the compliance inspector maybe do those initial, or somebody to try to streamline that process? Because I know we've got some builders with some delays on those, trying to get moving.
I think ideally, if somebody was piggybacking with Kurt, we could train and teach, but there's a lot to learn in this. Because not every property is the same. And we've kind of made that delineation in Title VII is that if your property's higher than the road profile, there's a different type of culvert we'd like for you to install as opposed to just a standard culvert. And so if we had somebody to piggyback Kurt, I think that would be helpful. But right now, it's Public Works Department does a site inspection to see what's the conditions on the property now to give you guidance of what we're expecting in inspections and for you to pass inspection. So that, I mean, Brett, if you wanted to add anything on that, the idea was to get somebody to piggyback with Kurt. That's kind of where we've just kind of
It's
circled.
just gonna be a process of educating somebody, because like Santo says, there's differences and you gotta, you know, unfortunately, we don't have anybody that really understands the impacts and so on with the same extent that Kurt does, so we would just have to.
Or maybe look for the time frame on when, you know, someone applies for an encroachment permit, they'll be able to have an answer within a week. Maybe.
I think it's open-ended right now. I don't think we've got a time limit. But if we looked at that, I think that's a policy that we can look at in Title VII if we need to.
That's, if y'all wanna do that, the challenge is just gonna be, again, getting the person and if we make a commitment like that, we're gonna have to live up to it. It may impact budget because, you know, not that this happens, but what if you get 10 encroachment permits in a week and if that person has other duties, it's good.
That's why I think it's obvious you're gonna have to.
Get 5 more Kurt's.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think,
Get somebody with it.
well, but part of that is we're trying to front load this encroachment permit. Because right now it says you need it before you get a building permit, right? So that's not how people were interpreting it before. Before it was, again, if you only need a culvert, you need to get an encroachment permit. But now if we're putting it in, we should get an encroachment permit before you clear the lot to get your trucks onto the property too. So, the timing of it is really trying to get ahead before your concrete guy shows up to pour foundation or piers. We're trying to get that site managed for stormwater a lot better in front than catching up during the construction side. So you were,
Well, I think your point, we obviously don't want people waiting more than they have to, but I think the select bit of the point. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have somebody who has a deficient permit, we're not issuing them a second permit, because that was the problem we were getting into is issuance of permit that doesn't pass muster, and they just move on to the next site, and we issue them a permit for that site and that site and that site. Whereas if I remember, the intent was if you come apply for an encroachment permit and the work that you do in the easement is deficient, we're not gonna let you skip ahead to the next. We're gonna make you rectify that one before you can get the next one. So I guess what I'm saying is the slowdown was a bug, was a feature, not a bug. In other words, I know that there is a reasonable amount of time that somebody should be able to expect to obtain that permit, but reasonable being a tricky word to define.
yeah, I don't know that any of this, the backstory on a particular one, if somebody didn't pass inspections before they could get to the next one. But I also know, never got winter, you know, so normally there's a natural slowdown in all activities, but there hasn't been this season. And if that's the anomaly or the norm, I don't know yet, but I do see your point. I do think, you know, we're trying to have more enforcement language into these so that it's not bad operators just running up all our inspections. I don't know the circumstances of the timing, if it's part of that, or it's just, we need an inspector coming out. But nonetheless, I think we're still trying to address it on the code side. Because again, I don't think the village wants to see bad contractors installing 15 culverts because that just screws up all of our road systems.
Yeah.
We've acknowledged that this is a condition in our road system that's detrimental. And so we've got to be able to protect our right of ways. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of it might be coming to that.
Well, but
Yeah, it seems like the compliance inspector could take some of that load.
for sure. And you're also right that we have a single point of failure right now. If Kurt's out of town, there's nobody to do an encroachment permit.
Well, we actually, Mayor Pro Tem, just to be fair, Kurt has been out of town and we had to have some stuff done, and he's done some initial training with Evan to step in his stead. Cause Evan also has been fully trained on doing tap inspections. But we started working with him on roads, cause that's not his, water sewer is his specialty.
Yeah.
So he is a good candidate for that, and, but I think if we wanna have Una start doing that, or Rick start doing that, it probably wouldn't hurt, just hadn't contemplated that.
Strategy number 5 just goes into this conversation we've just been having about drainage plans. If Public Works is going out and looking at the site before you start your encroachment work, maybe this is something we should also look on your building permit side is how are you going to drain after during construction and after completion? And how does that impact our right of way and our ditches? Strategy 6, we've been talking about this too on the encroachment permit review, culvert installations. If the property is at a higher profile than the road, what should we be looking at and considering for it to still work and be successful? I know Kurt has mentioned in strategy 1.7, communicating with local contractors of what these updates would be and what they look like. And I know it's been mentioned at the infrastructure committee to let everybody know these are going to be the new standards and the review procedures moving forward on these types of development plans. How do we address violations to Title VII of Village Code? What do we need to do? If it's silent on fines, is that something we need to add? Just what are the methods that we could do to just make sure everyone's in compliance up front? Being open to new strategies for storm drainage improvement, management practices and technologies that are a benefit not just to the roads, but the overall village as well. An annual plan that identifies 5 miles of road improvements within the village inventory. I think with an infrastructure committee going out and doing visual and physical inspections and assessments, that gets blended into this conversation of how do we pick the 5? And it's not just those that go to the house of all the committee members. It's how do we do this overall for the village? So. Goal number 2, there are some elements in goal 1 that blend into this. Just how do we communicate when roads are going to be under construction or there's going to be stoppage? This is actually coming out in Title VII as well. If you're going to have equipment or materials being delivered and you need to have vehicles in the road because the property is sloped, one of the requests that we're going to have is we need to see a management plan, a traffic management plan, whether it's a flag person or whatever it is, so that vehicles can still pass on the right of way while you're still doing your deliveries or installation of whatever it is that you need to do. But that also blends into, we've got infrastructure work that's happening up on Halo Pines, and you can post it up on the digital board or send an email blast to let people know that there's construction going on.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be important in case there is an incident.
Well, I think what you're gonna have is when you decide to start upgrading these water mains, hey, there's some road improvements being done because we're doing this installation, and how do we include that in that work to let property owners know that there's gonna be work zones going on. So instead of driving up to it, oh, there's a work zone.
This came up recently at the Firewise Committee. We think that Cimarron Watershed Alliance with the grant and the emergency evacuation thinning route, we haven't had any communication on that yet. And that's gonna involve, work in the ditches and easements, as well as the need for flag. If we're gonna be felling trees across evac routes to get them out of there. So that committee is getting with Cimarron Watershed Alliance, that is the grant, to do the work, to figure out Did that time frame? Has it been addressed with Kurt? Has it been addressed with, anybody else, any other departments that need to? Because we're gonna have some pretty heavy equipment work going on
Yeah.
our evac routes.
All of this makes total sense, and I just think that the strategies as they're being developed, we just have to be conscious of it. I mean, I think it gets really quick of, oh yeah, we got a bid, they start next week, go. And I think that's part of the mentality is that we gotta go fast, and oh, by the way, we should also acknowledge that this will be a 2-week project or whatever it is, so folks can make adjustments as they need to.
This maybe is a Kurt Roads question, but we spent that money on, what was the road that goes in front of,
El Camino Real.
no, the one back here, we paved it and then we had to repave it. We had to redo the sewers and it took like 2 years.
Oh,
Fail. And I guess my question is, a lot of these roads, since I drive around a lot, it's always the uphill curves or the downhill where it becomes a problem. Do we always have to pave? Like, could we say 1 mile of paving, but say, oh, this road, but then when it turns and goes up this way, let's just pave that section? Because it seems like a lot of the road issues could be solved with just spot paving versus trying to pave a straight distance of miles.
The challenge with that comes in, maintenance and in snow removal.
Right.
Because generally the big blades don't work well on asphalt. They have to use the smaller trucks. And so some of those big runs that we have are the reason on dirt with the blades is the reason we can get the the village done as quick as we can. If we're now having this guy and changing the route to try and go around that, because those big blades can pretty easily damage asphalt.
Asphalt. I just,
Pretty nice to touch spots and chip and seal again.
well, I mean, even coming down,
They just did it wrong on some of that.
comes down at the very end.
Cimarron Trail to.
Yeah, well, that was last little part. I mean, if they could just pave that part going in to that road, I mean.
I do think that we could have more egress pavement, where the heavily traveled, like I think it should be paved to the lake.
Right.
I don't know if we need to pave it. We might go up to that little circle, that first junction there, but because that gets a heck of a lot of volume. And it may make sense to do something like that. But
Some of that's
the
been
challenge with asphalt is it's great for the first 2 years, even asphalt. I mean, even well-done asphalt, after 3 or 4 years, you're spending money on it to keep it. It's just very expensive. The answer, dirt is a relatively inexpensive answer.
I think with respect to the road surface, the conversations we just had about storm water impacting our roads, I think if we got a better handle of managing that, it's gonna have a quality impact on the road surfaces that we have in inventory.
The big issue that I think you're gonna be presented with on Title VII is what do we do with the grandfathered in driveways? Because when it comes to water damage, there's 2 reasons. One is either a driveway that is feeding water onto the road. The other is a drainage path that's clogged or something and it causes the water to bellow up onto the road. And that's where we get the majority. I mean, the washboarding can easily be fixed. Yeah, it's gonna come back. That's just a fact of life with dirt roads. Unless you want to slow people down to 15 miles an hour, because the studies I've read said that you're gonna have some level of washboarding. It's mainly based on speed. And if you exceed 15 miles an hour, you're eventually gonna have washboarding on the road.
Well, I think if you can see there's people that.
And there are other things we need to look at, like, do we need, should we have stop yield signs instead of stop signs in some places and things like that, because also the starting and stopping process causes a lot of
Yeah, slipping.
road damage. There's another thing that I was just made aware of, that really impacts road damage is if your car's in four-wheel drive, you actually damage the road less than single-wheel drive. Or even positive traction.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you get people, not everybody has it, but we should tell people when you're on dirt roads, use four-wheel drive. Not because of safety, but because it does less damage to the road.
Really quick, the last thing on roads is actually a carryover from what we were talking about with water and sewer. It really is, if you open up the road once, put in all your infrastructure and then close it. That's really all it is on goal three for road, because it talks about water and wastewater coordination and management, but that's really why it was there. If we have this process where we can prioritize streets, we can prioritize sewer network extensions and water main upgrades. We just have to open the road once. That would be ideal. And so it may seem odd, well, why'd you put it here? It's just that coordination that we've been talking about in the previous sections, just to make sure it all ideally flows the same. That's all.
Kind of why they ran through behind the country club, because they were paving.
So we cut it once and patience on the table, quick, do it all. And then close it on it.
Unfortunately, like for the onto this addition over here, because there was no sewer available. And because we were trying to solve an ISO problem and an insurance problem and a fire hazard problem. It just didn't make sense to do the connecting subdivisions. It would be, 15 years before we got over here to do these. And that's where the majority of our water main breaks are in those two subdivisions. Not all of them, like between 50 and 60% are in those two subdivisions because they're some of the oldest and smallest lines.
This is great discussion. We've got one more section. Then I know you guys have to go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you got 15 minutes. Can you get through transportation? 15 minutes?
Transportation is shorter than roads as far as goals. So this was a conversation that started about, there used to be blue bus service in the age of fire. And after COVID, it stopped. And so part of this conversation is public transit. As you saw at our last discussion, the number of people who work in Angel Fire but don't live in Angel Fire, who are commuting to Angel Fire, and the amount of people who live in Angel Fire but don't work in Angel Fire and commute out of Angel Fire. So there was this conversation of, what about some type of commuter transport that we could access and utilize again? I don't know what the volume was when the blue bus service was here. I've heard stories that students used to take it to Moreno Valley High School. I don't even know where the stops were, but part of that conversation was, that's a transit district, and to get service, they encourage you now to be a district member. At a county level, Colfax County would have to want to participate. Part of the reason why this came up is there was a conversation of Blue Bus maybe adding a service line to Mona. If they were going to Mona, well, you're going to go right through Angel Fire if you do the route this way. So that's where this conversation started in the comp plan this time around. So there's a short section that provides a little background on it, but that's the limited information I have. I mean, the high school was a service stop, but I don't know where the other
So is
stuff.
it blinking light, the high school, the airport and the hotel?
Yeah, so the village spent $189,000 to get that blue bus in here. And on an average day, the ridership was 5 students from Taos to the high school.
A lot of kids.
Well, let's see, you would be empty going to Dallas.
So that's the reason why this is in this section here, is we're talking about transportation. There was this conversation about the blue line, and it did provide service, what it would take to have that considered coming back. The other part that's in here, that's because it's all related, to pedestrian aspect of transportation is the sidewalks that were installed. Because prior to DOT making the extensions north, it was just really here in the core that you had sidewalks up North Angel Fire Road. And then DOT came around and they extended it north. I think it goes to the bakery on the east side. On the west side, it almost goes to, well, it goes to Zeb's, I believe. If it gets to Alpine, I don't think it goes to Alpine, but,
It stops at the entrance to the housing.
okay, so it doesn't quite get to Alpine. Or whatever it is now, I'm sorry, it's not Alpine.
Builders first, right?
I think so, yeah.
Builders first, please. But there is a conversation with this because you have a crossing right here in front of, the fuel pumps. It's across 434. You've got the intersection here, 434 North Angel Fire Road. If those are within the jurisdiction of DOT, but if the idea is to provide more walkability, I know the parks and trails, I mean, you guys have been talking a lot about connecting to the resort green belts, connecting to the Frank Young Trail. There's gonna be spots where it's easier just to get on a sidewalk. Well, how do you get people to cross safely? And so that's why that's in this chapter here, not in parks and trails. Because this is really a roadway improvements and road, functionality. So we talked about briefly North Angel Fire Road, maybe going to one way, not one way, but one lane and then parallel parking. How do we get pedestrians to go from all this energy here that's going around the Great Lawn, cross going south, go around the lake, and then get connected to the green belts? That should be in this chapter, because that's really more focused as outside of a parks and trails conversation. But it talks a little bit about this need for service for crosswalks. And there's the crosswalks that have flashers now. Maybe that's something to be considered to make sure we have a high level of pedestrian safety at these crossing points. And the possibility of extending crosswalks. I want to say there actually might be a crosswalk where North or South Angel Fire Road crosses going to the church. Instances like that, I think from a pedestrian standpoint, how do we make sure that they can do it safely is the reason why it was put here. And then lastly, there's this ongoing conversation with UTVs. I don't know what's new on it, but again, that's appropriate in the transportation chapter, for whatever it's worth as the strategies or what they should be. It just shouldn't be omitted. It needs to be someplace, and this is where it should go.
Is it with, side by side UTVs? If it's not a direct cross across 434, can you go to the nearest cross? You just can't, you have to go direct cross.
134 is
Off limits.
essentially off limits. Currently, we're working on it.
But
We have, yeah, it has to be, you
Straight.
can't go, you can't have access to it right away at all.
this
Has
says
to cross it.
village streets or Highway 434, and I think it's just Highway 434.
There's an ongoing conversation about UTVs and where they should go and then what's the corridor. And the reason why it's worded this way is it's trying to capture, is it just village streets? Is it the corridor that we're looking for 34? It's kind of open it's written in a broader context because I think it's still being defined. Is that a fair way to say it? What's going on with UTVs and where they're going to be allowed and where they should go?
If you're asking me, we have the 2017 village ordinance that allows the ROVs, UTVs on any village street currently.
Okay.
What we are trying to get added to that is the corridor of 434 from US 64 to approximately mile marker 29.5, which is the turnoff to Forest Road 76, for the purpose of allowing lawful operations on the highway to gain access to that recreational area.
I have a separate question. I don't know if Red River looked into this, but if we can continue through the process and sounds like the traffic study's moving forward, if that goes, could those be utilized at some point? You know, if we're gonna have 3,000 people back here at some point for a concert, could those be used as some type of a ride share or mechanism to get people home that have come to one of our events, or is there any other municipality that's allowing that type of activity? I know we'd love to have, Uber is the example here, but I suspect if we ever had somebody from Uber showed up to do, take homes after a concert night, they're gonna make one run up Brazos in their Civic and never do that again. So is there any?
So I think hindrance to that is going to be, the insurance to allow the ride share of an Uber on a recreational off-highway vehicle that's intended purpose is not for public transportation, but to allow transportation across a corridor to a designated riding area,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
It does. I was just seeing a practical solution there, but to your point, there's gonna be some lawyers involved somewhere along that way.
Guaranteed, sir.
There was actually a conversation at Lodgers Tax about maybe using golf cart shuttles service. I don't know if it got to a UTV aspect, but again, this is why the conversation is happening, right? If there's an opportunity to develop a policy, develop a plan, this is kind of where it starts. Parks and Trails Committee, you guys are looking at EV bike standards,
Yes.
and what is and isn't allowed and where they should be. I think this is part of that same vein of conversations of UTVs. How, where, and how do we expand? So.
Well, it's just looking at a problem. We'd love to have, the 3,000 people back there, but if Greg's successful in getting us a Grateful Dead cover band back there, we gotta find a way to get all those people home as safe as possible, right?
No, don't go home.
Yeah.
Book your room. Book your room. Well, again, I think this conversation is needed in the transportation section, not the road section, not the lodging section. It's really about transportation overall. And how we developed it, again, that's why it's a working draft.
Doesn't the village also have a transportation bus? If we had one, and are we using it for the shuttles? Are we shuttling it all?
We did in the beginning, but nobody ever rode it, so we quit. And nobody's complained. But we do have a couple of Uber type providers that are local, and from what I hear, they get used quite a bit.
As that scale is gonna grow, the need's gonna scale right up with it, right? If the events get bigger, the need for transportation is gonna get bigger.
Well, to me, I like that idea, but it's more from a public safety. If we're serving alcohol,
Sure.
we should have people out there, okay, leave your car here and we're gonna give you a ride home. And the challenge with that is the 126 miles that we have to cover.
I'm in a UTV, I know it's short, but
So sometimes,
Yeah.
maybe before 2016 or so, we made a huge effort to try to get safety lights of some kind at North Angel Fire Road. And when we made the application to DOT, one of the questions was, how many fatalities have there already been? Well, the answer was 0. So we couldn't get it through because we didn't have fatalities. We said we're trying to prevent fatality. And we never got it through, but it's something we could take a run at again.
I think there's a change in circumstance from 2016 is now you have a sidewalk network that goes north
Right.
that didn't happen before. That's now connected to North Angel Fire Road, where North Angel Fire Road just stopped at 434. So I think it's worth another conversation to have, which is the strategy number 2, which just talks about pedestrian safety on 434, linkages between pedestrian trails and sidewalks, servicing during snow removal to make sure that they are safe. All the strategies in goal number 1 was to look at maybe public transit again with the blue line. And goal number 3 is really just talking about strategies. I guess they're just ongoing conversations about UTVs.
So I agree.
And if that's why this is still relatively short, but it's still something that doesn't fit in a roads or public utilities. It needs to be standalone. So,
I think you should also add into their air transportation.
so it's a standalone chapter right now, air travel. But we can do
We
integration.
haven't covered that yet.
Yeah, we did. It was in the last,
Oh, the last one.
Jeff said it was great. He actually said it again today. But I think we did have some elements in that plan, in that section that talked about transit services. I'll double check, but I want to say, because you have had some Uber drivers being utilized for services, and then the resort had shuttle service for people that booked for resort at the hotel. Right. So I want to say we did cover it in that chapter, but I'll confirm. As always, you're a great bunch. I appreciate your time, but please. If come back in a week or tomorrow and you're like, oh yeah, what about? Just drop me an email. I think all of you got an email from Ileana or myself that gave you the digital copies of this. Just send me your notes and I'll work it into the draft and continue making updates. So we've gotten final edits from draft and draft form on Parks and Trails. So I'll send out that chapter for review and discussion. And the last chapter is quality of life with housing, public safety, firewise, and wastewater quality.
So we'll try and have that, work session somewhere either the day of, or right around the next council meeting on the 31st.
And then Chuck, I'll be here for any questions you had on the previous stuff. Thank you for your time. Any other questions? All right.